Hello, this is Glenn, and today on Infants on Thrones, I sit down with psychotherapist Josh Neal to begin a series of reflective conversations about what we've learned about mental health through the experience of a Mormon faith crisis. You can find Josh at Capitol Hill Therapy in Seattle, Washington. And now,
this is Infants on Thrones.
Baby steps.
You want someone to preach to you.
The philosophies of men.
I like magical toys.
You want religion, do you?
Mingled with humor.
I don't believe in them.
There will be many willing to preach to you the philosophies of men mingled with humor.
We are evolving.
Baby steps.
You can buy anything in this world of money.
Look for the good in everything. Look for the people who will set your soul free. It always seems impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone.
all right, Josh. You know, it has been a good 5 months, going on 6 months, since I've recorded or published anything for Infants on Thrones. And the last thing that I did, I was kind of in the middle of I was reviewing Yuval Harari gave a lecture about AI and kind of chat GPT. And I was doing kind of like a multi-part review of it. And I just never finished it because one of the things that I said, I was interested in exploring the space between like my conscious mind, what I'm aware of, and my unconscious, what I'm not aware of. And like chat GPT, all the games I was playing with it in the early days, it's still early days, right? But for me back in May, it was leading me inward. And about that time, I was reading The Body Keeps the Score for the trauma class that I'm taking right now. And just a bunch of stuff came up. I've described it to people as if I lifted up this rock and I found all these little like kind of maggots and worms crawling underneath, like. So for the last 5 or 6 months, I haven't felt motivated to do really anything for Infants on Thrones. And it's been weird for me because I've been podcasting in this ex-Mormon space since 2009. And I don't think from 2009 to 2023, there's ever been 5 months or 6 months that I haven't been podcasting at least once a week. So it's been this weird break for me. And then you sent me this text a couple of weeks ago that is kind of like this spark that's you're bringing me back, Josh. So I wanted to say thanks for that. And am I right in calling you a psychotherapist?
Yes.
Tell me what that is, and tell me a little bit about yourself, Josh. I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you. Also glad to get you back on the airwaves.
Are these airwaves? I don't even know what you call these things anymore. Like, it's just weird what it is. I don't know what it is.
I think that the younger generation is calling it content. So you're putting out content again.
Yeah, I'm a content creator.
The consumers will be overjoiced.
As if I'm not always creating content at some kind of vibrational level, even with the thoughts that I think and the feelings that I feel, Josh. Anyway, I'm getting into like some weird stuff here. Please tell me about yourself so I could shut up for a little bit.
Okay. So psychotherapist, basically there are different people that study psychology and apply it in different ways. Psychologists study and publish and teach and can do psychotherapy, which is an application of psychology education for the purpose of healing other humans would be the way that I might put it. And then there are psychiatrists, which have the lens of the medical model, as well as they can do psychotherapy as well. But I specifically, I have a master's degree that I got at Seattle University in the Masters of Art in Psychology Existential Phenomenological program. And the purpose of that degree is to certify you in the state of Washington as a licensed mental health counselor, which is our credential. under which I practice psychotherapy.
So do you do more on the like working with people one-on-one or on the research and publication side? Where do you fall?
Yeah, my degree is utilized primarily for psychotherapy. So I don't
Okay.
do any researching. I could teach classes, and I also do provide ongoing training to other therapists in a CEU program that trains them on the weekends in the modality of Gestalt therapy, which is the method that I use to apply my psychological learning for this endeavor of human healing and growth and development.
Yeah, and I definitely want to hear more about Gestalt therapy as we go forward. How long have you been working as a therapist? How many years?
We're coming up on 10, I think. No, we're at 10. So I'm
10.
coming up on 11. Yeah.
Do you have any idea the number of clients that you've worked with over the last 10 years?
Oh man. Once you include my work in community mental health, the numbers go way up because you just have so many clients there. But then I didn't do that for as long. So probably hundreds of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, some people stay a long time in my practice and work with me for years. So it's kind of once I got into community mental health, my number or into private practice, my numbers started to go smaller, but they were still rather large because I was seeing people as a paneled insurance provider.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I adjusted to private pay, then that probably kept longer term clients for longer and less of the turnover of like insurance clients, which was a higher volume. Yeah.
Well, I'll want to talk to you about that more off the airwaves at some point, because I'm 6 months away now from finishing my coursework and starting my practicum. I'm in an internship, and I'm going to be working with somebody here in Arizona for a year or so before I am ready to like get out. But I know those decisions between like working with the insurance panel or not is pretty big decision. So I'm curious.
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah.
But we don't need to take up time on
Okay. All right.
here. But so you're also a former Mormon. Tell me about your did you listen to Infants on Thrones back when we did like the Mormon cred scale?
Oh yeah. I did.
I was thinking about that earlier today.
I have a decent amount. We didn't make bishop, so I think I probably fall short of that status. Anything above that, I think I'm trying. I seriously cannot remember if I ever was an elders quorum president, but I feel like I might have been. It was easily within the realm of like a counselor or possibly in there.
Yeah.
But served mission, did not get married in the temple. I got out before marriage. So I didn't get that cred, but all the way to mission. And do we count leadership roles on the mission?
I don't even remember. It was such a little douchey thing that we did.
It is
kind
so
of as a
douchey.
joke.
I know. I'm like, I don't want to talk about my status of ascent and as a missionary. It's so embarrassing. And it's embarrassing that when you're there, I cared so much about that. It was so validating.
Yeah. It was in the early days of Infants on Thrones, and I remember we were doing a listener essay, and somebody like did a listener essay, and it was pretty good, but there was something about his attitude, I don't know, that kind of like bothered us. But it was just like douchey little things. Then we found out, like, wait a minute, you joined the church for like a year and then you left, and now you're complaining. Like, you don't have the right to do that. We put our blood, sweat, and tears in this thing. We got more. Right. It was just like this silly little thing that we did. But anyway, yeah. So the Mormon cred, Bob's Mormon cred skill, because Bob got really like pedantic with it.
I like that, and I hope that at some point he included how much you spent on tithing and fast offerings.
Oh,
because
yeah,
that would be a game changer. Although that also is no. How consistently you paid tithing, because that's kind of even more of an asshole move, because then you're looking at how much people earn.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But it should be how many consistent years of full tithing did you contribute? That should be a Yeah.
And I said douchey, and you elevated to asshole. Like and
Yeah.
in the hierarchy of insults in my mind, douchey is kind of like, but asshole. But you're right. Yeah, it was very kind of asshole that we did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Getting it. Yeah.
so you've got your ex-Mormon cred, and what was your
Yeah.
what was your exit out of the church? Why did you decide you didn't want to be that anymore?
Yeah. I mean, I think I heard John Dehlin say this, that it's basically an emotional thing.
Mm.
And I really started to see it as a relationship thing. And the way that I would put my ending to Mormonism is it's like a breakup, but with reality. And it's because we weren't a good fit anymore. And I was very devout. I was very, very involved in Mormonism. It was a high level part of my identity. I might have been like a very enthusiastic super Mormon, and liked the rules and liked the way it validated and did these things. And in my family growing up, my parents, I later learned, have a high level of emotional immaturity, which makes your childhood rather difficult in some ways. And one of the ways I could get validation from my parents, my mother and my father both, actually, was by exhibiting zeal towards Mormonism.
Yeah.
And so I've really come to appreciate how much that functioned as a method of getting love and validation from my immediate family. So I was extremely obsessed with it because it was one of the most important ways I got that from them. And grew up in the scouting program, grew up in young men's, all those things, callings and speaking in church, etc. And when I came up to Seattle to go to graduate school, I had been going through a very, very hard breakup with a girlfriend that I dated through my undergraduate degree, which I got at UVU, Utah Valley University, for out-of-state listeners. And I think what happened primarily was two things. I realized that Mormonism didn't treat my broken heart in any way that helped. Personally, I didn't get healing or solace from recommendations for prayer, or this was something bigger than what Mormonism could cope with. And since my upbringing was to believe that God could heal these things, and yet the things that helped the most were a little bit of time and also snowboarding. I did a lot of snowboarding, and that really got me in my body and got me some space. And that was really mostly what I had at the time to cope. But it made me realize there were things that Mormonism couldn't help me with that were just insanely painful for me at the time. And then with the structure and support I got in graduate school, I had spiritual experiences when I would learn. And maybe that's some of the things you were talking about. I had spiritual experiences I had otherwise only organized within Mormon framework. I was experiencing outside of the Mormon experience. Yeah. And so for the first time, I started to get needs met in a system completely outside of Mormonism. And so the validation, the education, the structure, that all made sense to my mind. It's what I grew up doing, and I knew how to do it. But I basically see it as cheating on my girlfriend, the church, or starting to get into another relationship, and it was meeting my needs more sufficiently. And for me, what happened then is I began becoming obsessed with Mormon history, and I started to do certain things about that to try to, for me, if I'm looking at it, and again, this is a bit of kind of my Gestalt thinking, which is looking at how needs organize meaning and behavior in humans. And so I see that I had needs that were now getting new information of how to meaningfully meet them outside of Mormon theological framework. So I'm having validation massively through this being a master's student because of, I think societally and also within Mormonism, it means a lot to become higher educated. And so that was happening. And just for me personally, because growing up, my life was also very chaotic, and I never felt very comfortable in school or competent in education systems. I often felt really anxious in school. I had a lot of energy. They always wanted to diagnose me with ADHD, and they tried but never could. I didn't have all the symptoms of it. But I think I was just very anxious and very energetic and wanted to move and do things like that. And so being in a master's program felt like a big validating event of like my value as a person and things like that. And I think for me, it felt like there's a silver bullet in breaking the illusion of an ideology, but in this particular case, Mormonism, and it's to finally critically allow yourself to question it. And so I don't think I'd ever put Mormonism on the table to say, can this hold up? Yeah. Can this hold up to well, I'm lacking the word, but scrutiny. Can this hold up against scrutiny? And once I finally asked the question in my mind and let my mind actually ask it, to me, it was just the wooden stake to the vampire heart, and it was gone. I was like, yeah, no, it's not true. This thing I was told that was heavily enforced by social kind of pressure, really, didn't have that. I'm getting needs met elsewhere. And I just felt like I didn't really have. I described it this way. It was like I was slowly moving out of the house of my like long-term partner or something. And eventually I came home one day and I was like, there's nothing for me here anymore. And all my stuff's in this other place. And I think we're done. And that was also kind of how a lot of the stuff I did before finally quitting unfolded. And then I had a friend who was leaving Mormonism, and he basically had heard me say some stuff, and he has a much higher impulse like response than I do. And he was like, yeah, I'm out. This is over. And I was like, me too. And that was like the more official way that I did it. And then, yes, I listened to a ton of your podcast, Infants on Thrones. That was awesome. I was just obsessed. It was the challenge of being, going through the all consuming, faith transition was extremely intense for me. For years, I was listening to a lot of podcasts. I was doing a lot of my own kind of processing. And I think Mormon Expression, Mormon Stories, Infants on Thrones, those were the big ones that I was really consuming. And I read In Sacred Loneliness and Bushman's book, No Man Knows
Rolling.
Yeah. Basically, it's the slower, more padded version of No Man Knows My History.
Right. Yeah.
Read the abridged version.
Yeah.
For the listeners.
Well, that was a lot, Josh.
Yeah.
And there were a couple things that you said in there that I wanted to double click on and revisit. Sure. And the first one, when you were talking about your parents, and I don't remember if you said that they had high emotional immaturity or low emotional maturity, but it was one of those. It was one of those things. And that's such a fascinating thing to just recognize and understand more about, like parents that, and even I know you're not married and you don't have kids. I have 3 kids, and I might also myself be an emotionally immature in certain areas parent with them. Right. Despite how I wish I wasn't, So I'm curious to hear more like what that means for you, like how you see that in your parents. What is low emotional maturity or high emotional immaturity? Kind of what role maybe the church plays in that? That's one thing that really interested me. And it led right into needs not being met, and these needs that you have that they might not even be acknowledged. So you've got needs, they're not being met, and that ties into Gestalt therapy, which I'm very, very interested in.
All right. You just pulled a John Dehlin 5-part paragraph question.
Yeah, I did with my hands tied behind my back. It was easy.
He's got nothing on you.
I
So
wouldn't
let
say
me
that.
take part one. Let me take part one, and then we can go from there. I think I can remember it as well, but you can also remind me.
Yeah.
But just talking about my experience with my parents and around this idea, there's a book, I think it's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Yeah.
And that's a very good read for a lot of people, I think. Definitely useful as a concept for me. I actually haven't read the book, but I understand it.
How
in
would I
concept.
know? Like, how would I know if my parents are emotionally immature or if I
Well,
am
you
a parent?
don't. The answer is
Yeah.
you don't,
Yeah.
because you're a child and you're looking to them in a certain way. And the only way that you could begin to identify your parents in this way is to first reach a certain level of maturity and health yourself, that you have differentiation and autonomy to be able to critique them. And so prior to that, you're very unwilling or unlikely to even criticize your parents.
Yeah.
Because that itself is threatening to a child. So it kind of becomes a double bind that the child has to get needs met sufficient that they can be differentiated enough that they can start to view their parents from the lens of separate people that are just humans and make assessments about their behavior. Certain things that can happen outside of that are moments where it may become clear to you, no matter what you want to believe, you can understand that your parents are doing something wrong. And I think that can happen and happened for me. My mother, like historically, just to give a little background, my parents split when I was 4 years old. And I was the youngest of seven. And my mother left my father and took him. And so a lot of my life, I was moving back and forth many years. I ended up in Southeast Texas for a bit of time, off and on, where my mother had family, and there's a little Mormon hub down there. And then I would end up back in Utah, etc. But these turbulent events themselves are a part of the emotional immaturity, is like not thinking about how the moving will impact a child. And my mother would say things like, God has told me this, so it's unquestionable, and then do something dramatic that affected everybody's life, like moving over and over and over and over. God's telling me to go here. God's telling me to move again. And as kids, we just felt the chaos of that.
Right.
Things that I became aware of later with both of my parents and their way of responding was in attempts to communicate something like critical feedback to my father. It's just not something that he can tolerate. My dad would do things in moments where I'm trying to give him critical feedback, and he's going to start accusing me of things or saying, you do this too. And I'm just sitting there thinking, and at this point I have enough experience with other adults that I know not every adult acts like him.
Yeah.
So that's part of how I became aware of this. But and I can speak more to the interpersonal interactions that I've had with my parents. But
yeah, and look, we don't need to throw your parents specifically under the bus, but we're kind of drilling into those things that I'm really interested in of like, if I like, what are the aspects of maturity or immaturity, like emotional maturity or immaturity? So like with your mom, you talked about like this impulsive decision making where it's not really thinking through how her choices are going to impact the kids.
Yeah.
With your dad, it's the inability to really have a discussion about criticism, like to accept criticism, to be introspective, to be self-reflective. I don't know, how would you describe those? Like, these are the aspects of emotional maturity or immaturity that are either low or high.
So somebody who is emotionally mature, in my opinion, they're going to be able to do a few different things, which is they can hear different perspectives without becoming reactive to them. Yeah. That's one.
Because it doesn't threaten anything, so they're not getting triggered and going into that fight or flight.
Exactly.
right.
Exactly. My father goes immediately into a fight or flight, and I've really come to, and I'll just speak to him, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
Or speak to how he was specifically, is I've thought there must be some really early developmental, and I've heard enough stories to know there was some traumas that have his reaction. I would almost put it like age 2, very, very early, age 2 or 3. So you think about how a child around that age deals with emotional distress in the outside environment. They can get in arguments. There's a really cute one, and maybe you've seen it, where the little 2 kids are talking about it's sprinkling or it's raining. Have you seen this video?
Mm-mm.
So it's a great one to illustrate distress for children. It's very cute. People can look it up. But these little boy and little girl are arguing about what their mom told them precipitation is. One calls it rain, one calls it sprinkling, and it's really cute. And the little boy goes, "No, because my mom told me it was sprinkling." And the little girl's like, "No, my mom said it's raining." And they get really distressed. So one of the core fundamental ways we think about people fighting or getting into difference, their emotional maturity really predicts how they're going to handle that encounter. And one of the ways that people begin to fight or get into conflict, because we have different strategies for conflict besides, or strategies for dealing with difference besides conflict and besides fighting, is they get nervous system upregulation as a result of the difference. And that can lead to different ways of trying to solve that feeling in their body. I believe that any difference, even especially political, religious, or directly critical to my father, creates an immediate sense of distress in him. And the empathic caring side of me is that I believe he had really rough experiences at very early ages, which froze him in some very earlier places in development, where he feels his existence is in threat, similar to those kids, that the very difference in word is having a jarring effect on them. They don't have nuance. They don't have the ability to do that. That just means I'm totally wrong. Reality is wrong. And it's a very scary event if something doesn't fit, and they want to conquer the other's reality to make their reality hold. And this will have relevance to many things that I think we talk about, because it's a foundational event of dealing with difference between individuals, in cultures, in stories, in all this stuff that I think is relevant to the listeners. But that experience in my dad is something I just encountered constantly. It was just, you couldn't even present the most basic differences without him just jumping in to try to change you, to get to make you be like him so he could settle his nervous system again.
Yeah.
So that's an example of emotional immaturity, and kind of a small explanation of how mature it leads to different things: ability to see difference without feeling threatened by it, ability to appreciate and care about other people's emotional experience while holding and honoring your own experience separate from theirs.
That's it right there, isn't it? Like, it's funny, as I've been listening to you give the explanation, I was thinking about, we were kind of joking around via text about the name Infants on Thrones, and you suggested that maybe it's time to be called Teenagers on Thrones. I'm like, I don't know if we're ready for that. Maybe preteens on thrones. But it kind of is like this emotional maturity, like the emotional maturity of an infant coming out of this system where, like you said, there's pressure, social pressure, all kinds of different pressure that conditions you to think and feel and cope in certain ways within Mormonism. And it's not monolithic. I mean, I think every family has their own little unique way that they apply the overall Mormon stuff. But one of the things that we're interested in doing is looking at the way that Mormonism impacted our maturity, right?
Yeah.
And then where do we go from there? And so we're going to talk about some things. So this is a good first step. I like where this is going. What else do you want to add to this, Josh? The emotional maturity, and then we're like leading to the needs being met.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking, not the best thing to do on a podcast in audio form, but I'm thinking about this concept of maturing, and my mind was going some different directions with analogies on it.
I'd love to hear.
Yeah, and it's this idea of like, so with a faith crisis, there's kind of, or at least a specific one with Mormonism, there's specific things that I believe are patternistic or trends. And one of the trends with the Mormon way that we're talking about is that certain parts of you are very, very infant-like and underdeveloped or atrophied. And one of them is kind of internalized sense of values and autonomy, and that your own voice has a self-respecting gravity to it that you have a relationship to, because it's mostly externalized through the church, how you make decisions, what you ought to do, and you're kind of suppressing or binding that part of you so that it doesn't get exercised. And so when you're talking
I'm not
about
sure
that,
I'm totally following you on. Could you give me an example?
yes.
To illustrate it?
So an example to illustrate it is, what do I think about what is my relationship to how much respect I give my own thoughts? And in Mormonism, I would say it's a common trend to not have a deeply developed sense of respect for your own opinions, thoughts, and reality, because you're constantly being taught to suppress that into the structure. So it's a way of, it's an infant or kind of atrophied self-respecting ability to really respect and honor and connect to oneself instead of an external support system. And so I think people who come out of Mormonism, like many people coming out of abusive relationships, they seek another abusive relationship to meet the needs the other abusive relationship met, and they end up often in the same place. And so a lot of Mormons come out with infant-like thinking, as you would, from this ability to respect their own thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and they seek another authoritarian moral regime, worldview model, and we see the patterns, we see where they end up.
That makes a lot of sense, because so as you were explaining that, I thought back to an experience I had in an elders quorum many years ago. It's been a long time since I've been in an elders quorum, and somebody was talking about this article that somebody had done, and they're like, I read it and I'm not sure what to think about it, but it was written by a general authority, so it has to be good, or something like that. And I'm sitting there in Bloomington, Indiana. Everybody in the elders quorum is in graduate school, and I'm like, we're being trained how to critically think about things. And I don't remember exactly what he brought up and how he did it, but that sentiment of like, I can't really reason this for myself, but this guy who wrote it, he's a general authority, so I'm just going to believe that. I remember at the time that was a huge red flag to me, and I went, wait a minute, what? Shouldn't we also go in and think about this for ourselves? And it created kind of it was almost like a loyalty discussion. Like if you would somehow think that I even had this with Joseph Smith once. Like oh man, this is taking me down a major rabbit hole of memories coming up here, Josh. When I was reading 1 Corinthians 15, is that what it was? Where it was like the telestial and the terrestrial and the celestial kingdom. I was preparing a lesson for gospel doctrine class, and I really wanted to understand the etymology of these words.
I think Corinthians only has terrestrial and celestial. I think telestial was a glossolalia Joseph Smith invention.
Yeah, it was.
He was just riffing off of the other ones.
Totally. It does. And so I went into Corinthians, and I'm like, okay, celestial means heaven. Oh yeah. So and terrestrial means earth, like Terra, Mother Earth. Oh, okay, duh. So there's these two columns of like the things that are earthly and the things that are heavenly, the things that are corruptible and things that are incorruptible, things that are moral, things that are immoral. And there's no room for a third category there. and it, like the telestial thing, it drove me nuts. And I went to my bishop. I went to all these. I'm like, why is this? Why are we saying that the Joseph Smith translation is more accurate? Because when you look at this, it just does not make sense. And people just like blank stares. They didn't know what to think. And at that moment I went, am I smarter than Joseph Smith? Like, is it possible that I'm looking at this? Like, am I right and he's wrong? That was like a huge shift for, like, it almost felt like hubris for me to even entertain that idea. And I'm like, well, I'm getting a PhD in whatever year it was, 2002 or whatever year it was. And, like Joseph Smith's this farm boy in the 1800s. Yeah, I think I'm smarter than him. I think I know more about the world than he did. And probably all those earlier guys. I'm probably smarter. And that was really uncomfortable for me at the time.
Yeah.
I felt like I can't tell anybody this or I'm going to be like run out on a rail.
Yeah. No, that's a great example. It's a great example of the point that essentially you have the capacity to think for yourself and to make your own judgments and evaluate things.
Can't help it.
And it's going to, yes, and it's going to happen. But if it gets in conflict with what I would call a social truth, which is not something that people make available for critique. Like, I can name a social truth right now that is pedophilia is bad. This is a social truth I agree with. And I think most people agree with this social truth. But if you question that social truth, the questioning itself is heresy. Now, there's some things that it feels even appropriate to have in that zone, particularly this topic. In my view, I would say that's a fine social truth and it's functioning in a way that I'm comfortable with, actually, and aware of. But Mormonism overreaches that to the dampening of your ability to connect or think for your own self. And that example you're illustrating is when you understood something that the social information or ways to think about it couldn't contain. And once you're outside of that, critiquing it comes at risk, because now you can lose social status for attacking this idea that isn't one that we use the scientific method on. It's one that believing the belief itself is virtuous. And this is one of the ways in which Mormonism atrophies the self-relationship, is it overextends that to almost everything regarding these really absurd fundamental claims that cause you to underdevelop your own relationship to yourself.
Yeah.
So it's an infant self-relating and self-expressing and self-exploring and self-developing. And it's extremely limiting and painful, and it leaves you underdeveloped. So,
and it seems like it creates this habit of self-doubt and self-deprecation that it just is hard to escape from that. I think that the school system kind of does this in a way too, Josh, and maybe some of the troubles that you had as a kid who had a lot of energy, you didn't really fit into the model of how you were supposed to be educated or what education means.
Right.
And there were probably, I'm guessing, this time where you would come up against the pressure and you would just kind of like turn off whatever was your instinct that you thought was right to do, but it was bumping up against this social truth in school. And I don't know, am I
it's funny because I'm reflecting on it and I'm thinking about it. And this is one of the things I really admire about my mom. She comes from a father who is an entrepreneur and kind of do-it-yourself guy, and she's always had the same attitude. As a result, she's always kind of held school in somewhat disregard. And she also didn't emphasize education on me, which has left me just a blank spot of anxiety, really. But the other thing is I also didn't fully respect school myself.
Yeah.
And so I think I actually escaped what I would say the main message of school. The main thing it teaches you is obey, which is similar. Obey, do what we say. Well, it's even more than conform, because in a way it's worse, because it's training you to jump when they say jump. The point isn't to actually learn a thing. It's to take a test and demonstrate you can jump through a hoop when told to do that.
Yeah.
And I pretty much escaped a lot of that, although the result was just a ton of anxiety because I was never doing what I was supposed to do. I was always pretty crazy.
Is that anxiety where you feel like you don't fit? And maybe this goes into like the needs, like the needs that you have, where, because you talked earlier about the need to be validated.
Yeah, it did come to that. So I wanted to feel important and loved by my parents, and that was something I didn't get because of their emotional immaturity. And one of the only ways I could get that was through religiosity, we could say. The more Mormon I was, that was rewarded. And so that became an important organizing way. I met the need of feeling valuable and loved by my parents and important to them. There was also just a lot of actual unavailability from both of them because of the divorce early on, kept my dad out of the picture, and my mom was always working. So I didn't have a lot of time with her. I didn't grow up in her presence very often. Many times there would be nobody in the house when my sister Courtney and I would come home from school when we were very young, like second, third grade, first grade, and other siblings that were older were kind of orbiting in and out at different times. But so there was just a lot of this empty space. Okay, I think I lost my train of thought on this because I was
I don't know. We're going along. We're talking about the need for validation.
Yes. So that's the need part. So that ties the story back. So a lot of this need just to feel loved and cared about by parents that were available and physically present was not met. So in school, I also had pressures put on me that weren't necessarily tied to this, but I also knew that smart people were valuable from society, and being intelligent and smart is always emphasized and being dumb is bad. So these are things I ingested too, but I didn't have much support from parents at all. I grew up rather feral. And so this desire to feel valuable and loved and important could be met through this. But in schooling, I also knew that was there, but I always didn't fit that system. There wasn't a lot of emphasis from my mother on that. And she would do the best she could, but I think was very, very busy and just trying to basically survive. And so when I finally got into just regular university, I started to actually do the systems that were there more proactively than ever before. Funny enough, a very foundational part of my adult learning was coming back to classic literature with my friend Taylor Deco, who started a book club, and we just read classic literature. And I would read like 20 books during the summer, and we were just grinding through all this literature and like some modern classics as well. We read some Kurt Vonnegut and other folks, more contemporary. But that was like a whole new education for me as well. And that happened, I think, my freshman or sophomore year of college, kind of throughout that year. I probably read like over 100 or 200 books that were in just the classics. I read all of unabridged Don Quixote and Les Mis and like a bunch of other stuff. And it just like, that was crazy. But
like read or listened read?
I read them. I picked them up and read them. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was big to read all these books as an adult.
Yeah.
And also I think useful because I appreciated them and thought they were amazing.
Yeah.
And then in college, I started to click that I could actually learn because I had a lot of self-doubt. And your question about it leading to self-doubt, I think it's more foundational and primitive than that. And I did want to speak to that, which is it atrophies the self-relationship. So it's even more pre-verbal or in a sense than doubt. Doubt is a different thing. It's almost like I don't know myself. You become alien. That's one of the ways of thinking about it, is you are alien to your own self because you have over committed to the community's needs for you. And so this is actually a Gestalt way of thinking that one of my Gestalt heroes, Hannah Hostrup, she defines it as a polarity of overly involved in the self leads to isolation, over connection to the community leads to becoming alien to the self. And all of us are in this tension. And for me, Mormonism definitely pushes you into alienating your relationship to self to maintain larger connection and social cohesion. And so the corrective adjustment is to become more connected to the self and to be able to expand into that and to become more self-respecting, self-understanding, and self-connected.
Yeah. And
self-relating as a total. Self-doubt fits somewhere in there, but it's a little more lower base level thing I'm talking about.
And when I'm thinking about self-doubt, what I'm thinking about is people who don't think that they have any value. You know, like what I think, my opinion, my experience, there's no value in this. You know, like when I would teach English composition classes, again, going way back, you know, we would have like personal essays, like write something, and and I'd have people who just didn't know what to write about, and they didn't feel like they could, or it wasn't any good, or it wasn't. And I just remembered feeling really frustrated about that, and wanting to encourage my students to believe in themselves more. And like, no one has lived the life that you've lived. No one thinks the thoughts that you think about, like, so share your unique and expressive self. And there was that the theory that I have formed is that school, like the schooling system, disincentivized people to share themselves, because it might not be the right answer, and you might get your hand slapped, or put the dunce cap on or something like that. So it's kind of this suppressing your own unique experience of life, and you're constantly looking like, what do other people think? Is this okay? And that sort of thing. So that's a kind of all rolled in when I'm thinking about self-doubt.
That makes a lot of sense. I understand that. That reminds me of, I maybe mentioned it when we briefly talked the other day, Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He's essentially talking about this, and it resonates with what you're saying, which is this idea of respecting your own originality as a virtuous thing.
Yeah.
That's worthy and important. And it's important because it's yours.
Yeah.
And that is where it is inherently valuable. And so his essay kind of returns you to acknowledging the inherent worth of your own original thinking for the sake of its own originalness, and for no sake of anything else, and to kind of put other people's thinking in its proper relationship to that. He would be one supporting leaning a lot more towards the self, or at least the essay brings us back to the importance of that, and illustrates that this is an ongoing human struggle, that it exists in many different ways and dynamics, and has been a human problem for as long as humans are around. And it's a problem that chimpanzees face, which is maintaining a self and remaining in connection to others, and the needs between both, which is a Gestalt principle of how do we do this. And that's what predominates how we function in relationships.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've covered the exhaustively this little double click that I wanted to go on. About the emotional maturity, about the needs that you have. We talked about the need for validation, fitting in.
Yeah.
And then you've talked about Gestalt therapy several times. So let's dive into that just to wrap up today, and then maybe we'll kind of like touch on a couple of things that we'll be talking about in future conversations from there.
Yeah. Well, just to kind of piggyback off of needs, well, there's so many different things. My mind's going like 5 different angles.
Yeah.
But one of the things that kind of Gestalt therapy invites us to consider is how our need for anything organizes our reality itself. The need is organized. The need serves as a catalyzing or motivating force for how meaning emerges. And so, for example, if I'm in a room and there's a chair, the chair has a very specific meaning to me and a function and a way of relating to it. But if I'm in the room and all of a sudden the temperature in that room goes to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, I may find the chair to have a new meaning to me, which is firewood.
Oh.
And I may organize, or if someone's banging on the door, the chair may organize as a blocking for the door. What it serves as, or how I relate, how it functions, is in part, and it's not total, but in part it is shaped, and you go different layers, you have more about how these things unfold, how need shapes the way we understand and engage with the world around us at all times.
So if you just need to sit down, the chair's there for that. But if it's really cold and you need heat, well, then you'd use it for something else. And so
maybe it's firewood now.
Yeah.
Now it means firewood to me, or means possibility for firewood, even though I still may maintain, because of previous experience, that it has this, but But if I, and this gets into like rigid formation, you could be a person that thinks chairs are sacred, and so it can never be used as firewood.
Yeah.
No matter
because
how
you've
many
got
times,
a deeper need there for
to
to
connect to the community, or the social need is predominating.
Yeah.
The need to maintain the social truth.
Mm-hmm.
The chair is sacred and cannot be burned.
Yeah.
But that's kind of an example based on what we were talking about, and just kind of just touching on needs a bit and my own leaving Mormonism, but kind of piggybacking that into Gestalt was I had a need actually around this thing we've been talking about to feel more, because I was so lonely from leaving Mormonism. I was so hungry for community, and that's part of what the podcasting world and what you and the other guys gave to me was a chance to feel safe expressing my own inner thoughts and my own original beliefs. And when I found the training program that taught me Gestalt therapy, I was going through some of my post-Mormon stuff. It had been a couple years and I was further along in that, but I still was now needing community, and especially a place where I felt authenticity was extremely built into the value set because of my need to be able to be safe to be me.
Yeah.
And when I went there, I just saw people doing this amazing thing where they were showing up and being more authentic and more real than I'd ever felt, because of the constant suppressing to fit the mold in so many other places. As
this was
discussed.
In the Gestalt training that you went to.
This was in the Gestalt training. It was by Bob and Rita Resnick. It was their GATLA program, but that's Gestalt Associates training in Los Angeles. But it was a chapter in Seattle that was focused on couples working with couples, where Bob and Rita Resnick would come up here and train. And Bob has passed. Rita's still with us, but she's aging and not participating as actively as much in the training programs. But I got there and I was blown away. I was blown away by what these people were doing, what I was seeing. I saw people showing up, taking risks, owning themselves, and talk about like my own built-in radar for seeking emotional maturity. This was like the most emotionally mature group I'd ever been around, and their ability to interact with difference and hold it without social truth dominating, but having these principles and values that appreciated people's individual present moment, real authentic experience is kind of the currency of the community. It's even said that present moment experience is the currency of connection. That was something I heard Bob Resnick say a lot.
Say that again. Present moment connection.
Experience. Present moment experience is the currency of connection.
The currency of connection.
Both in money, but also energetic exchange. It's like I'm being fully in touch with what I am experiencing right now and sharing that with you. And if you do the same, we have the highest level of connection. And there's another level up from that called intimacy, where that's happening, but I'm not scanning myself at all or scanning you for any level of safety. There's a free flowing ease with which that's happening. And that's what we call intimacy, where there's no monitoring of self or other. There's just a complete nervous system relax and an expression exchange going back and forth.
So is that a non-judgmental space?
I think it would need to be, because that would include monitoring self and other.
Yeah, that's what, when you're like monitoring self and other, like, I don't know that I am ever in that place, Josh, where I'm not like monitoring myself or others and kind of like critically judging and taking the temperature. Is this okay? Is this safe? Like I'm really suspicious about things.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that might be, some level of vigilance you have, probably well earned. And I think of it more like the word that comes to mind is like organism. It's a way of referring to humans that Gestalt therapists talk about, the organism, but it's like it feels like the same kind of energy to have that intimate experience as any other biological function. And not to get nasty, but like peeing, pooping, vomiting, when it's just taking over and you're finally surrendering to the nausea and it almost feels like good, but it's not, but it is. it's like a very organic feeling, or like an orgasm or something like this, like when the ability to fully release. And or I imagine nursing, like a child when they're nursing with their mother, between the two there's like a fulfillment of just complete ease and goodness, and you're enveloped in this like very almost psychedelic reality of connection. And that's, I think for me, that's what's possible in the highest states of intimacy, where there's no, it's finally so much of an overabundance of support and safety, that both, and a history and an ability and a kind of a value of both, of the inherent value of humanity, and a willingness to be there to witness each other. And that's where that can facilitate these really, really healing, empowering, powerful experiences. They're not, and that's the thing that I think Gestalt really hammers in, is you are doing something with the person that is experiential. And that sounds so, it's very detached from how powerful those words really are when you understand, like, if a doctor puts your arm back into socket, he's not talking to you about the ideas of relocating arm. He's doing something with and to you. And that is what the therapeutic encounter of contact between the client and the therapist can allow, when it's the most the highest level amount of that person may have ever had in their life, to be fully present with the person, taking them in the moment. And the Gestalt model looks at the different things that get in the way of that. We call them contact boundary disruptions. And there are certain patterns that those follow around certain issues that we look at. But the idea being that the contact is the healing that allows an experience that allows awareness to emerge in the person. And from those experiences of awareness, the person brings what might have otherwise been out of awareness. These terms mirror unconscious, conscious. They're just a different framework.
Right.
And those experiences allow the person to live with more intentionality. And that intentionality can allow for growth, or it can allow for meaningfully doing the same thing. It does not mean that they need to change. It means they become more fully who they are and more deeply connected to their own sense of awareness of self. And from there, if they should endeavor a wish or a desire to integrate more values or experiment with new things, they can do so. They can take, what I would say is, they can take more responsibility to live a meaningful life, because what they're aware of, they can respond to, both by doing the same thing meaningfully or experimenting with new things and learning and growing and developing deeper relationships with anything they may wish to do.
Tell me a little bit about what attracted you to Gestalt. Like, how did you come across it, and what was it about it that made you go, okay, yeah, this is what I want to dedicate my life to. I think this is going to be really powerful and helpful and healing.
Interestingly enough, this is what I would call one of my fully more integrated spiritual experiences of my life, where I tapped into something outside of me that felt like some kind of sense of calm and do this. And that something, I don't want to organize it too much, but that's what I'm aware of. And that was applying to go to graduate school at Seattle University. Always felt right to me, and I always knew I would get in. I don't know how to say it differently. I knew that I would get in, and I knew that it was the right fit for me the moment I applied. And then from getting the letter for the interview, to doing the interview, to getting the acceptance letter, I just knew that was where I was supposed to be. When I went there, I studied existentialism and phenomenology, which are two crucial elements for understanding and moving into Gestalt therapy method and application and theory. So I studied what I would say is a foundational approach to engaging with and learning Gestalt therapy theory and application and method. So my entire graduate program.
And just tell me really quick, existentialism and phenomenology. Those are big words. What do they mean? What are they referring to?
Existentialism is and there are probably listeners of yours that might be phenomenologists, and that's a whole world. So we're more lightly phenomenological, but it's a thing. And I hopefully they don't roast me in the comments. But I
don't have comments anymore. Like I'm telling you, Josh, there's probably We used to joke around about dozens and dozens of listeners of Infants on Thrones.
We've got dozens of listeners.
I haven't published anything in 5 months. I don't know
Okay,
what's
all
going to
right.
happen when I
All
publish
right.
this thing. But
All right, that's hilarious. Okay, well, we'll see. So for the dozens of listeners we
Yeah.
have, if there's any phenomenologists or existentialists,
Yeah.
don't come at me. But I would consider an existentialist, which is essentially a philosophical branch of study of philosophy that looks at the human being kind of as a bottleneck on the pursuit of what is the true and the good and the beautiful, or whatever philosophy's foundations are. And so these existentialists basically argue that the goal of what we're doing has to acknowledge some of these restrictions on how we interface with reality, and primarily that is that we are human. So they want to look at the nature of existence itself in order to be able to look at some of the constrictions placed upon us as beings with certain things. And so at first they're just arguing what is the essential nature of existence, and from there, how can we interface as humans with existence in a way that would allow us to get at the project of the true, the good, the beautiful. And so existentialism is looking at what is the necessary elements of our reality and how do those shape how we interact with it.
So when you gave the example previously, you were talking about how even primates, what was it? How
they're dealing with the dilemma of how do I maintain a self and have
and their social like navigating their social. That would be an existential approach, because you're saying that the larger issue is connectivity, and that there's like social groups, some kind of social order, some kind of harmony that has to be met. And like,
yes, but beneath that would be an existential principle of separateness. So each person comes into the world as themselves. This is the nature of all humans. This is the existential. This is the thing that is inherently part of our reality. It is separateness.
Yeah.
And connection. We exist separately, but we exist in the world. And
reliant
upon it. So the feature of organismic separateness, but constant connection to reality, Heidegger calls this the being, or Dasein, and the being in the world is the phrase he gives to describe it in total. The being in the world is all his German phrase that describes separateness in the world. Individual being constantly in the greater environment and reality. So that is his existential, is the being in the world. And so we are looking at each individual as a unique organism with separateness that features the dilemmas of separateness while being in the world at all times, fully reliant, fully connected, 100% a part of.
And then what's the pragmatist approach or side of that?
So the application from that
not
method,
pragmatist. It was what was the other one? It was existential, and was it pragmatism? Phenomenology. Oh, it was wrong P word. It's been a while for me, Josh.
Yeah.
A little rusty here.
Yeah. he's been off the track for 5 months. Give him a break.
Yeah.
Phenomenology comes from the kind of existential idea that the most appropriate approach to reality is not to take this essentialist view that like there's a perfect version of a chair, which is a more primitive way of thinking in philosophy. And it's to take the approach that the best way to it's shifting from the best way to interact with reality is to describe it. And that method would be the phenomenological method, is not a method of causal analysis and looking at what is essential about a thing, but looking at just describing it. And so it's a descriptive approach that's uniquely useful for Gestalt therapists, because we're no longer looking for the cause of your depression. We're asking you to describe it, because we're not trying to treat a broken thing. We're trying to determine better understanding of you, of self, so you can take responsibility for your experience in the world, which is to understand meaningfully your depression. So it's a totally different paradigm shift. It's a paradigm of what I view the human healing project as fundamentally. And so we look to phenomenology because our goal in the overarching healing project is not to fix a broken causal system, but it's to look at a being in the world and how they're meaningfully organizing reality to increase their awareness of their existence so that they can take more responsibility for that existence to live a more vital and meaningful life.
Okay. I think I understand existentialism a little bit better than the phenomenology part, but that's just my own limitations right now as I'm listening to you right now.
Phenomenology is a method of existentialism whereby we describe things rather than seek to take them into parts and unstudy them. If we're studying reality as an existentialist, we use phenomenology as a method for gaining information about the outside world instead of using another method, which would be to pull it apart into atoms and causal chains.
Okay.
We just prioritize human experiencing, and we want a human to describe things that are uniquely human. So sadness, we wouldn't pull it apart into the dopamine absence in the mind or a spike of cortisol or a neurochemical explanation of causes. We would look at, can you describe what your human experience of sadness is? That would be the phenomenological method for understanding sadness, which is to understand it from its humanistic perspective of how a human being actually experiences it.
Okay.
Does that help it get a little more clear?
I think so, but I'm trying to resist the urge of asking more questions because I know we've been going for over an hour and we don't have to talk about it all right now.
Okay. Okay.
But it's helpful. And what that made me think of was if somebody goes into a psychiatrist and they say they're sad and they're like, okay, well, you've got these low dopamine levels, or let me get prescribed this medication to you and here's your fix. And then you go out and, okay, I'm not sad anymore, but you still haven't really addressed what's going on in your life.
Well, so fundamentally there, Glenn, is just this thing of like the built-in idea that sadness is bad or needs to be fixed. Right. And so I had this visual when you said that of this person walking around with like a completely blank face, living life in this very detached, dead way. And their like slogan is, I'm not sad anymore, but they're clearly not thriving anything. Or living well. Yeah. I'm not sad anymore.
I don't feel emotions anymore so that because I didn't want to feel the sadness part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I eliminated the sadness and therefore I eliminated my humanity. I eliminated the whole point.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up this discussion today. When we talked last week, you mentioned a couple of things, and I don't want to spend too much time on these, but just to kind of introduce it. One is how lonely men in particular seem to be in today's day and age, and you just kind of recognize that there's an issue that you'd like to address there. And then the other one was around, you talked before about heresies, like challenging heresies. If there's some kind of a social truth that you're challenging, and you're recognizing that there's a lot of that going on right now, and that maybe we could take a look at what we've learned from coming out of Mormon think or being shaped by Mormon culture, and what does that tell us about the larger culture at whole when there's this kind of virtuous signaling and things like that are going on. So the loneliness of men and the kind of cult-like ideologies that are out there right now that we kind of want to explore a little bit of. What do you want to say about either of those two things, Josh?
I'm really interested in needs, as we talked about before, and the needs of humans in our modern circumstance. And I think a larger cultural analysis from outside of many of the common dominating lenses would be very refreshing and needed. So I'm really interested in that, just describing cultural phenomena that are happening and attempting to do so outside of many of the modern paradigms. And I think that does include a lot of the issues that I think haven't been discussed, but are now coming to the surface, and different people are showing up to speak on these topics, specifically around the experiences of men and what it is to be a man in the modern world. Loneliness is one issue, but just a larger way of seeing how schooling can impact men. I think it impacts men differently. based on just hormone development and energy in the body, et cetera. There's lots of different things. I don't want to get too in specific here, but
it's kind of like a response to toxic masculinity
that's one of the frameworks that exists that I would like to speak outside of.
Yeah.
I would like to not get sucked into fighting it or
Mhm.
joining it. I would rather look at what men are doing and try to describe and analyze the situation and add a positive voice for how to live well and come from our own place of our own original thinking, and to let that be the primary guide as we explore and look at what's in front of us and what we see in the world. This kind of leads to a larger thing as well, which is as you leave a kind of a cult, you can analyze what is the kind of what's the shared humanity that this thing had that exists as humans. What do we learn about human beings, and how does this show up in larger and smaller systems across society, and how does it help you engage to have been through a kind of rough role like Mormonism presents? What do you gain, and how does that serve you in when you encounter these same things in everyday relationships all the way to larger societal pressures that we find ourselves in? So that's kind of what does that answer? That's what I'm interested in.
I think so. Yeah.
That's what I think is a really cool project, is to essentially exercise our own original thinking on some of these topics and look at what's going on and look at what other people are doing and talk about, what impact it seems to be having or how they're framing the situation, and try to speak, as original thinkers in a world of heresy, where having your own original thought or trying to come at something authentically and vulnerably is very punished on many levels. And so I wish to speak from my heart around the things that I think are important and talk about them, so that other people having their own original thoughts can start to do more of the same.
That sounds good. Well, I look forward to having the conversations with you, Josh, and I hope that as we go forward, you'll do some Gestalt therapy for me, because this idea of being in the moment and not getting lost in the judgments of things or the monitoring of things, or even disassociating through fantasy, and just like I find myself all the time, even as I think podcasting has helped train me to focus on a conversation as it's happening, which has been really good for me, because a lot of times I'll just get lost. I'll just kind of be like doing my own thing, and then somebody's been talking. I was just in my own head kind of thing. And so understanding myself a little bit more from that Gestalt perspective, learning how to be more present. I'm excited to go forward with this. When you talked last week about the kind of epidemic of loneliness that our society seems to be in, I feel that. I feel that a lot. And so I'm interested in putting my shoulder to the wheel.
Let's talk about it, man. There's a lot of people that want to hear this and want to have this conversation. And there's a lot of people, I felt a lot of loneliness myself, and the quiet despair of the modern man, with not a lot of outlets. So I think it's an important dialogue. The other thing I'll say, if you're open to it, is just a reflection on a Gestalt technique regarding what you were just saying. Are you open to this?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Like right now?
Yeah. It's just very simple. The goal is not to get out of your head.
Right.
The goal is to notice if you're there and share it as you did. And then you're present again, and you're present with me at any moment where it's actually happening. And that can keep you in the moment, is not to be in the moment in a certain way, but to honor however you are and however you come into the moment, including when you're in your head.
Yeah. It is another way of saying that you're never not in the moment.
Well, you are I understand that way of putting it, but you're not in the moment when you're captured. When you're attempting to do two things at once and you're not in awareness of what it is you're doing, you're not in the moment, actually. You're in you might be in a past, or you might be in another thing, or there's places you can be, but it's when you wake up to it, then you're back.
So it's the focus of your attention is not
Bingo.
on the moment. The focus of your attention is ruminating on the past or projecting forward into or some kind of fantasy kind of thing.
Being in a reactive state, perhaps. Yeah. Yep.
But the awareness of like, okay, in the moment right now, I'm reflecting on things
or
in the past.
You could say I'm reactive and you could be correct. Yeah.
And then that kind of like brings your awareness. Oh, this is happening to me right now where I'm
right now. And then I could describe what it is and how it's happening.
How it's making
look
you
at
feel.
it. I can start to be with it. I can start to gain new connection to it. And then I can start to experiment.
And that's an empowering tool for self-awareness.
Yes. That's one of the most, we're getting into basically talking Gestalt now.
Put down the weapons that you use against yourself. You don't need them anymore. Lay down the weapons that you use against the world. We don't need another war. Put down the weapons that you use against yourself.
Hi, this is Hillary.
Matthew, Ryan,
Carol,
Keith,
Ashley, and I like to play bingo online while listening to Infants on Thrones.
You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com.
And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes.
I did.
Anyone for the closing prayer?
My worst crime is an inside job. Dark thoughts taking over like an inside mob. I tune into the scene between the eyes and take a breath.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Throne.
I sit still and watch the thoughts float past me. Never mind the future, never mind what the past be. I like to jump and let the universe catch me. Free fall, watch the beauty blow past me. I keep my pockets light, destination in sight. Keep my actions elevated to compassionate heights. I'm walking past the fight, laying down.